The rain in Ashfield doesn't fall, it sinks. It drags down, slow and heavy, like a body refusing to float. Each drop lands with a tired thud, more accusation than grace, and never quite disappears into the dirt. Instead, it clings, puddles, seeps into the marrow of the town until the air itself feels like penance. People say the town's been like this ever since Reverend Malachi Ward died, though if you ask the old ones, the rot began long before. They'll tell you how the skies cracked open the night his heart did. Black thunder bruising the clouds, wind throwing fists at the steeple cross until it bent like a spine under confession. They'll whisper that Ashfield was never meant to dry out, that the rain is a covenant, a curse, a reminder. They say his boy walks like thunder now, and his eyes, those are the storm. I remember the boy, before he was the man, before his voice deepened to echo his father's cadence, before his hands carried the weight of scripture and shame. We all do. Back then he was just Caleb, with mud-caked boots and a silence too sharp for his age. The kind of child who watched sermons from the back pew, fists balled like he could hold his breath until the world behaved. Not unlike his father, who believed a soul could be corrected like a spine, forcefully, with pressure, with fear. Reverend Ward ruled the pulpit like a battlefield. His gospel was brimstone and bile, his theology soaked in wrath. He'd bellow about damnation with the conviction of a man who'd already seen hell and built a house there. Sin, to him, was not an act but a stain, and the only way to cleanse it was through fire. That fire often looked like bruises hidden under sleeves, like mothers flinching when a voice rose too suddenly, like children praying not for salvation but invisibility. But Ashfield needed its monster. Or maybe it needed to believe that someone else bore the weight of the storm. Malachi Ward gave them that. A scapegoat who roared louder than their regrets. So when he died abruptly, on a night that smelled like sulfur and sounded like morning, the town was left with too much quiet. No one spoke of the bruises then, only the rain. And now, years later, his son has returned. Grown, gaunt, eyes hollowed by memory or perhaps prophecy. No suitcase, no umbrella, just a black coat and a face carved from all the things no one dares say. He walks Ashfield's broken streets not with purpose, but with gravity. And people step aside, unsure if they're making way for a preacher or a reckoning. The church still stands, though the bell hasn't rung since the night Malachi fell to his knees mid-sermon and spoke a name no one recognized. His body was found hours later, alone in the sacristy, rain leaking through the roof like a second baptism. Caleb hasn't opened the doors yet, not publicly, but lights flicker at night, shadows move, and sometimes, if the wind blows right, you can hear voices. Not hymns, not prayers, something older. They say trauma echoes, that it loops, rewinds, plays back through bloodlines like an old tape, refusing to be erased. Caleb knows this too well, because somewhere inside that church, buried beneath mildew and scripture, is a cassette labeled simply, "Last Night," his father's final confession, his final fury. And he's listening. Maybe that's why the rain won't stop. Maybe it never will. The next morning, Ashfield wakes to a silence that isn't silence. It's a hush curled inside the ribcage of the rain. Thicker, heavier, like the town itself has fallen into prayer or dread. No birds, no passing cars, just the occasional cough of a gutter choking on last night's downpour. Caleb steps into this stillness, coat dripping, tape reel gripped in one hand like a severed lifeline. He doesn't lock the church door behind him. Let them come, he thinks. Let them hear what I've heard. But no one comes. Not yet. They watch from windows, behind curtains stained by years of storms and sermons. He makes his way to the library, the only building that smells less of mildew and more of dust. He hasn't set foot in it since he was 14, when Reverend Ward dragged him by the collar for slipping a psychology book into his backpack. The only book worth reading, his father had snarled, is the one written by the hand of God, and he doesn't stutter. But today, Caleb walks the aisles unchallenged. He seeks archives, records, anything bearing the name Elias. Nothing comes up in the local registry. No birth certificate, no funeral notice, no congregation rolls. As if the name existed only on that tape and in his father's final breath. He finds a photograph instead. Wedged between the pages of an old hymnal, likely used as a makeshift bookmark, is a faded Polaroid. 2 boys. One, unmistakably young Caleb, his scowl already forming, one eye swollen beneath a dark bruise. The other, older, with a wary tenderness in his posture, hand curled protectively around Caleb's shoulder, scrawled on the back, Elias, 1987. He stares at it until the image ghosts beneath the plastic. So the name was real, the boy too. Why had no one spoken of him? Why had his father buried him in silence? And more urgently, what had happened to him? The church's sacristy holds no more answers. Caleb tears it apart anyway. Drawers, boxes, old robes. Behind a false panel in the back of the wardrobe, he finds a second tape, unlabeled, no case, just a thin ribbon of memory waiting to be wound. Back inside the sanctuary, he threads it into the recorder. This time, the voice begins with no delay. "I told him not to go near the well," his father mutters, words like wet gravel. Told him it was cursed, that the water remembered things. But Elias never listened, thought he could fix what came before. The rain outside slows. Briefly, Caleb leans closer. "I caught him kneeling there one night, whispering into it like it could speak back. I watched him drop something in his mother's necklace maybe, or the locket with her picture. Then he looked up and saw me. He didn't flinch, just said, 'If you love him, you'll let him go.'" The voice breaks. "I didn't understand. Not then. I thought he meant you, that somehow Elias wanted to take you from me. I didn't see it was the other way around." The tape crackles. There's a distant sound. Metal clanking. Maybe chains. Then nothing. Caleb feels nausea curl up his throat. He'd always been told his mother died in childbirth, that it was God's will, that some sacrifices were sacred, but no one had ever mentioned a brother. A well, a locket, a boy named Elias who tried to protect him from the fire that lived in their father's hands. He walks back to the church basement, a place he'd avoided since childhood. Mildewed stairs lead into a chamber that smells of rot and rust. In the far corner, a rusted pump handle, a stone lip, the well. He approaches it slowly. The air grows colder. He half expects to hear a voice rise up. His father's, Elias's, maybe even his own younger self begging to forget. Instead, there's only silence, but it's the kind that listens. He peers into the dark. His own face stares back, wavered by water, framed by stone. Then something else, something beneath the surface, a shimmer. He reaches in, fingertips skimming cold that feels older than rain. He pulls out a chain, a locket, delicate and corroded. Inside, the image of a woman he's never known but instantly recognizes, her eyes, his eyes, her mouth drawn in sorrow. He stumbles back. The chain slips through his fingers, clinking against stone. Ashfield exhales. Above him, thunder murmurs. Not the crash of wrath, but the low groan of something ancient, disturbed. The church creaks. The lights flicker. He clutches the locket and realizes, for the first time, he is no longer afraid of his father. But he is afraid of what comes next. What does one do with an inheritance made of silence, shadows, and storm? The rain begins again. Caleb stops sleeping. Not as a rebellion, but as a surrender. Sleep had always been the final mercy of exhaustion, the blessed curtain at the end of memory's theater. But now, every time he closes his eyes, he sees a boy's hand reaching toward a well, hears his father's voice fracture, feels the weight of all that wasn't said pressing down like the church's sagging roof. The town watches him come undone. They call it transformation, but it feels more like erosion. The rain doesn't cleanse him. It wears him down, pebble by pebble, until he's more outline than man. He wanders the church halls barefoot, muttering sermons that aren't sermons, just fragments of verses, lines his father had pounded into pulp with repetition. "Spare the rod," he begins, then trails off because he no longer believes in the rod nor the sparing. He finds himself praying, not to God but to the silence that came before him. He prays into the well, into the cracks in the church walls, into the quiet hours just before dawn when the whole town seems suspended between repentance and relapse. He prays not for forgiveness, but for remembering. The tapes multiply. Hidden in hymnals, tucked beneath floorboards, wrapped in vestments like relics. His father had been archiving his madness, or maybe his clarity. Either way, each recording is a fresh incision. Malachi speaks of Elias often now, of rage misdirected, of a boy who ran instead of kneeling, of the night Caleb screamed and Elias took the blame. One day, his father had said in one recording, "He will come looking, and I will not be here to shield him from it." Caleb listens with a fist pressed to his mouth. He had not remembered screaming. He does now. A small room, a broken lamp, a belt dropped in the corner, Elias stepping between them. His father saying nothing, just turning, walking away. Later, Elias was gone. Caleb had assumed he ran, but the well, the tapes, the silence, there was no running. He confronts the congregation one Sunday. Not during service, there are no services anymore, but mid-morning as they shuffle past the church on their way to routines that pretend not to need absolution. "You remember him," Caleb says from the steps. Rain streaks down his face, and the collar of his coat hangs limp as though drowned. You all knew about Elias, about me, about what he did. No one answers. They glance at him the way one glances at accidents or lightning, acknowledging only enough to avoid being struck. One old woman, Mrs. Halberd, meets his gaze. Her eyes are fogged with years, but something ancient stirs there. He asked us not to speak of it, she murmurs, said it was the only way to keep you safe. Caleb laughs. It escapes him like steam, like pressure finally hissing out. Safe? You think I've been safe? She flinches. Maybe because of his tone, or maybe because she sees Malachi in him, in the tilt of his chin, the heat behind his voice. You all prayed for rain, he says. You got it. You prayed for silence. You buried it. He turns and enters the church, leaving the doors wide open. Let the town hear. Let them reckon. The sanctuary becomes a mausoleum of memory. He pins the tapes along the walls. Strings connect them. Dates, names, confessions. A detective's map of inherited wrath. He finds the locket again, lays it atop the pulpit, lets it catch the filtered light through the broken stained glass. It glints like a wound that refuses to close. And then, one night, a boy comes. 16, maybe 17. Soaked through. Eyes hollow. Familiar, not Elias, but close. You the preacher's kid? The boy asks. I was, Caleb replies. The boy nods. He hurt my mom, years ago. No one believed her. Caleb doesn't answer. There's nothing to say that won't taste like ash. The boy steps inside, looks around. This place, it feels like it remembers. It does, Caleb says. Do you? Caleb hesitates. I remember enough. They sit together in the pews, the rain tapping like Morse code on the roof. Caleb plays one of the tapes, not the loud ones, not the furious ones. A quiet one. Malachi, breathing, just breathing. And for a moment, it feels like something sacred, not forgiveness, not absolution, just the acknowledgement that they were all haunted by the same sound. Breath, waiting to be released. In the weeks that follow, the church becomes something between a shrine and a wound. People begin to enter, not in crowds but in singles and pairs, drawn not by faith but by its absence. They come because they heard the tapes were playing again. They come because they can no longer pretend the rain is just weather. Caleb doesn't greet them. He watches from the shadows, lets them listen. Some cry, others sit stone-faced, jaw-clenched, as if reliving an old injury beneath their skin. A few leave small offerings, photographs, torn journal pages, a baby's sock hardened with age. All these tokens gather at the base of the pulpit like artifacts from a drowned civilization. The sanctuary smells of mold and confession. And the tapes, they begin to distort. Not just in sound, but in essence. One night, Caleb hears his father begin a monologue he's already memorized, only to veer into something new, something he's certain wasn't there before. I used to believe God was in the thunder, Malachi mutters, voice warped like stretched cloth. Now I think he hides in silence. Not because he's absent. Caleb rewinds, plays it again. This time, the line is gone. Another night, he hears a child laughing on the tape. Not malicious, just soft, unknowing. It echoes, circles the rafters, then fades. He rips the tape out, heart hammering, but there's no explanation. No record of a child ever speaking in any of the reels. He dreams of the well, not as it is, but as it was. Clean stone, no rust, no rot. A child stands at its edge, not Elias, not Caleb, just a shape, featureless and still. It leans forward, whispers something into the darkness and turns. Its face is blank, but its mouth is wide. It speaks in Caleb's voice. Are you listening yet? He wakes with his hands around his own throat. He doesn't scream, he doesn't breathe, just lies there, rain bleeding through the cracked ceiling, eyes wide and wet. He begins to hear his father even when the tapes are off. Not sermons, not monologues, just presence. The way a room holds heat after a fire, the way a house creaks when it's remembering. Caleb walks through the church at night and feels eyes that are not his own. Sometimes he whispers Elias's name aloud, just to ground himself, just to say it enough times that it becomes real again. One night he tries to preach, not to a crowd, just to the rafters, to the ghosts, to the town. He climbs the pulpit and opens his mouth, but the words don't come. Not at first, then like a rupture, they pour out. Wrath, he says, was never holy. It was never fire meant to cleanse. It was always hunger, and we fed it. His voice cracks, not from emotion, but from misuse, from disuse. My father starved for grace, and when he couldn't find it, he taught me how to burn instead. His hands tremble on the pulpit. I have burned too. The lights flicker. Somewhere, a tape rewinds itself. Somewhere, water drips in an unseen rhythm. He steps down. The boy returns, silent this time. They sit together in the back pew. Neither speaks. Until Caleb says, I used to believe he was a monster, but if I could understand him, maybe I wouldn't become him. And now, the boy asks, I don't think he was a monster, just a man who mistook his wound for a weapon and passed it down like gospel. They don't say much after that. The church creaks, sways, the air grows heavy with unsaid things. And outside, for the first time in months, the rain slows to a mist. But it doesn't stop, because trauma, once released, doesn't vanish. It waits, finds new shapes, slips beneath doors and into lungs. It becomes part of the weather. Caleb understands now. He was never meant to inherit forgiveness, only the choice to interrupt the cycle. Ashfield never dries. Even when the rain pauses, brief breath-like gaps between storms, the streets remain slick, puddled with old reflections. The town doesn't rot. Not exactly. It endures, like a wound scabbed over too many times to ever truly close. The church doors remain open, always. Hinges swollen, warped by dampness, but they no longer resist the air. People drift in and out, still not speaking much. They don't come for absolution. They come because they need to hear something, anything that confirms their pain wasn't a hallucination, that the years they spent clenching their jaws and lowering their eyes weren't just survival, but resistance. Caleb lives in the bell tower now. He never rings the bell. He leaves the tapes running, looped endlessly on an old player jury-rigged with wires and a battery he bartered for from a man who never quite looked him in the eye. Sometimes the recordings skip, sometimes they bleed together, overlapping like layers of silt at the bottom of a riverbed. His father's voice interlaces with his own, words indistinguishable, identities murkier by the day. One morning, he finds a note tucked beneath the sanctuary door. I was Elias's friend. He told me once he was trying to save you, that he believed you still had a chance. No name, no return. Caleb holds the note for a long time, then burns it with a candle stub. The ash drifts upward, curls along the ceiling beams like a ghost exhaling. He visits the well again. The rain has slowed to a drizzle, but the earth remains saturated. He kneels at the lip of the stone circle, not in prayer, but in listening. The water below shivers, disturbed by something unseen. He whispers into it, not a name, not a sermon, just sound. Something warm, something unformed. I'm still here, he says finally. I remember. It's not an apology, it's not redemption, but it's something. He closes the locket, now tarnished to a dull grey, and tosses it back into the well. Not to forget, but to give the memory somewhere to live that isn't inside him. As he walks back to the church, he thinks of Elias, not the boy from the photo, not the ghost in the tapes, but the gesture, the standing between, the shielding, the silent scream of love distorted into protection. Maybe that's the truest kind of mercy, choosing to take the strike, even when you know it won't be remembered right. Caleb steps into the sanctuary and pauses. Rain patters gently on the roof like fingers on glass. The tapes spin. A faint voice emerges. Not his father's, not Elias's, not his. A woman, singing. Faint, distant, warped by time. He doesn't move, doesn't breathe, just listens. The voice fades, slowly, like fog dissolving at sunrise. Outside, a child laughs. Not in malice, not in fear, just laughter. Real, small, alive, and then stillness. He doesn't look to see where it came from. He just sits, hands open on his knees, head tilted back toward the leaking roof. Let it rain, he thinks. Let it rain until all things hidden rise. Let it rain until the silence is finally full. How do we carry the storms of those who came before us, without becoming the thunder ourselves?